You guys like monsters? Because I've got several new sightings to share with you. Sightings of mysterious creatures in the wilderness of North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, and other unlucky places where you should probably either avoid camping or go extremely prepared. There will be Bigfoots, or is it Big Feet, goatmen, and animals that defy explanation and all logic. Prepare yourself by finding the biggest stick you can get your hands on. These are allegedly real monster sightings. If you have a story or creepy experience of your own and you want to share it with us, go to darknessprevails.org. Now, let's begin. Something is wrong with the woods behind my old house. From Sara. My parents, little sister, and I lived in a house on the northwest near rural edge of Greensboro, North Carolina for 14 years. We only moved away about 3 years ago due to a very long and very unfortunate string of circumstances. It was a pretty nice house, decent sized and with a huge backyard that was surrounded by deep, sprawling woods. I grew up hearing and seeing all kinds of wild critters out there. White-tailed deer, wild turkeys, vultures, hawks, owls, raccoons, you name it. It was beautiful. One of my favorite pastimes was sitting on the roof that overhung the back deck, smoking a cigarette, watching and listening to the wildlife. Back in 2011, my then boyfriend Tim moved in with us. He and I and our friends would sit on that overhang at night, drinking and smoking and hanging out. All of us being very outdoorsy people and enjoying the sights and sounds of nature. I had told them all about the kinds of sounds that I and my family would hear out there late at night, sounds that none of the local wildlife could possibly have made. But until that night, I was the only one that had heard these strange sounds. That night, Tim and I had our friends over to have a few drinks and planned to light a bonfire in the fire pit that we had built on the very back of the property by the woods. We needed to wait until it was late because we had recently been annexed into the city limits, and it was now illegal to have bonfires that weren't in those portable metal fire pits. In the meantime, we all just hung out and had our beers on the roof. It was around 10:30 to 11 p.m., and we were all laughing and joking around, having a grand old time. Then we all noticed a light coming from the woods. It almost looked like it was someone walking back and forth on one of those old overgrown hiking trails with a flashlight, staying just beyond the tree line. We could hear the dried leaves on the ground crumbling and twigs snapping under their feet. That was the only thing we could hear, and I mean only thing, because the rest of the forest and wilderness had gone completely silent. We all stopped talking, watching and listening, trying to decide if we should go down there and check it out. I tried to rationalize it in my mind, thinking to myself, it's just some guy out on the hiking trails. No biggie, right? But I knew better. Something just didn't seem right. I was beginning to see that the light we were looking at wasn't much like a flashlight at all. It didn't waver the way it would if someone were holding it and walking around with it. Instead, it was very steady, unnaturally steady. Then as suddenly as it had appeared, it faded out. Imagine turning off an old tube TV, the way the light of the screen would get bright for a moment and then slowly fade away. Now we could all see the faint outline of a pale humanoid shape around it, still pacing back and forth along the tree line, staying within the boundaries of our property. This went on for about 5 minutes, that strange figure pacing back and forth, us watching it. Finally, Tim and Steve had enough and wanted to go check it out themselves, and tell whoever that was snooping around our property to kindly screw off. We all agreed to go down there together, since there's safety in numbers after all. Tim and CJ grabbed their hatchets, Steve his machete, and Corey, Alex, and I had our knives. We went down the staircase from the deck and entered the backyard. As we made it to the halfway point between the house and the woods, the unmistakable stench of decay assaulted our senses. It wasn't terribly uncommon after all. Where there's wildlife, there is death, so we didn't think much of it at the time. But then we heard something, a piercing shriek or cry that no human or animal out here could possibly make. I know what deer, coyotes, foxes, and all the other native wildlife sound like, and this sound definitely wasn't made by any of those. We all froze. By that point, the figure had stopped pacing and seemed to have vanished, as though it had simply disintegrated into the darkness of the woods. Then there was the sound of frantic, thundering hooves and rustling brush breaking. It was like a herd of deer suddenly manifested and were stampeding nearby, just beyond our field of view. Perhaps they were terrified of the thing that made that cry. Another shriek resounded, only this time it was mixed with a sort of deep snarl. Whatever it was sounded big and mad. Then after that, more silence. We all whipped around and booked it back to the house, wanting absolutely nothing to do with whatever was happening in there. The smell of decay had vanished along with the sounds. Upon making it up onto the deck, we all turned our gazes back to the forest, straining our eyes, looking for something, anything at all that could explain what we had just witnessed. But it was all calm and normal again. The regular sounds of a southern summer night returned, and it was the last I ever heard that bone-chilling shriek. I've no idea what we all saw and heard, and none of us dared to go in to find out, even in the daytime. I'm kind of glad, to be honest, because I'm not sure I want to know what it was. All I do know is that something was stalking us that night, and I'm sure that if we had continued into those woods, things may have never been the same again. Be careful in the forests of North Carolina. Something's out there, and it's definitely very dangerous. Trapped in My Truck, from Country 1989. I'm a trucker myself, but this story is from another trucker I know. You should understand that we see a lot out on the roads, and quite often that means death. Accidents caused by motorists for a variety of reasons can turn pretty gruesome. Hitting something, anything, going 70 on a highway is always messy. Anyway, yeah, if you work as a trucker long enough, you're bound to see something terrifying. And what I saw in the look on his face when he told me this story, it was a look of pure fear and terror. I met the guy in the great cheese state of Wisconsin, far north of the Dells, obviously at pickup. We were both going to be there for a while. I was going to be going further north, and I mentioned that I would be stopping somewhere near Connor, Wisconsin. He immediately interjected, telling me that that's not a good idea. Okay, I asked why. He flicked the remainder of his cigarette and lit another one. He looked down at his hands, then mumbled, I wouldn't go there, not anywhere near that neck of the woods. He only made me more desperate to know why he was saying that. I insisted. Why? What are you talking about? Then he finally began to explain. He said, 5 years ago I was delivering to the ranger station. When I arrived, I was told by the ranger that we couldn't unload until morning. And I said that's fine. I got enough drinks and smokes, and a night in those woods seemed pretty peaceful. Before I knew it, I had fallen asleep in the cab. A faint sound woke me up. When I realized what the sound was, my eyes widened and my heart stopped. Someone was trying to open my truck door. I leave it locked every night, so luckily they could try all they wanted, but they weren't getting in. What was scary was why someone was trying to sneak into my cab in the middle of the night. Whatever it was stopped, then moved over to the passenger's side, trying that door, but there was no way it was getting inside. As he told me this, he reminded me that he wasn't much of a fighter. He was dreadfully afraid that it was a bear, and that it was only moments away from breaking through the windows. He continued. A few moments later, the sounds stop. I took the opportunity to open my sleeper curtains. The only light I could see through the windows was from a distant electric pole, which was few and far between out here in the woods. It wasn't much, but the light was enough to see that a figure was walking around the front of my truck. And boy, was it tall. This guy, whoever it was, would have been at least 8 feet tall. Seconds felt like hours watching this thing, as it slowly tried to find a way to enter my truck. And then it grew desperate. It began to run and slam itself onto the metal from the outside. It was hitting the truck so hard that the stuff in the cabinets were falling out. I can hear the thing hollering and growling with frustration, or maybe it was in pain from hitting the truck too hard. When the figure disappeared into the tree line, I thought it was over. But then the rocks and tree limbs began to hit my truck. I could hear this thing out there, throwing things, grunting, just getting madder and madder. I took the second to stop his story and asked him what he thought it was. He began to describe it. He said, "It moved into the perfect lighting for only a moment. I could see how massively tall it was. I could see a head like a ram or a goat, and a chest that was broad and covered in shaggy fur that was dark black. Its legs were bent backwards. It was the strangest, most terrifying thing I'd ever seen." I was so scared that I grabbed my family's photo that I kept on the dash, and I began to pray. This next part is what really messed me up the most. I heard the thing while my eyes were closed, walking up to the driver's side door. It was technically inches from me. Instead of trying to get in again, trying to break down the glass, it just laughed, like a human-style cackle. It was so dark, so demented. When it had its fill of laughing, it walked away, and the rest of the night was silent. I didn't sleep, instead keeping an eye out through the windows. Weeks later, the state rangers and officials determined that the damage done to the vehicle was from a bear trying to get food on the inside. But I swear up and down that that's not what it was. So if I were you, he told me, finishing his story, I wouldn't go up there, day or night. And if you have to, if you really, really have to, don't stay for long. The Knocking Man, from AmmeJeanRomeo. Throughout my childhood, I moved houses a lot due to my parents divorcing. After that, myself and my 3 siblings were shuffled between them both. One particular house we lived in, I was 13 years old. It was one of the creepiest places I've ever had the misfortune of stepping foot in. Until recently, I'd almost forgotten about this incident, as I think that I had subconsciously tried to block it from my mind. It had been a hot summer's day, and I was lying on the grass in the garden just staring up at the sky. Immediately behind me sat our conservatory. It was attached to the back of the house, sitting between the living room and kitchen. I'll point out here that, being effectively a glass box, this room got super hot in the summer. So in order to let even a sliver of breeze into the conservatory, my dad had left all the windows open. Anyway, as I said, I was lying in the back garden, on my own, basking in the hot, late afternoon air. Back then, my family was pretty poor, so all I had to listen to, music-wise, was some tracks on an old personal CD player. I was listening to some cheesy pop music. I can't exactly remember who or what it was. An hour or so passed by, and the sun was starting to set, casting all manner of creepy shadows over the long, high, fenced-in garden. I set up, gathering my things, and intended to head inside, when I caught sight of something moving in my peripheral vision. I looked over to the conservatory, straight at the spot that I'd seen the movement. My eyes widened. I saw what I can only describe as a shadowy man. He was trying to slip in through the open window. I say it was a man because it had no discernible features that I could see, but it was tall and thin and vaguely human-like in shape. I let out a shrill scream, causing the thing to turn to look at me. It didn't have a face at all, but I could feel its non-existent eyes boring into me. It dropped to the floor, flat, and in the blink of an eye, faded out of existence. I sat there on the grass, staring at the exact spot it had disappeared. I was still not quite believing what I had seen. After several minutes, I roused myself, grabbed my possessions, and ran inside, making sure to lock all the windows and doors to the conservatory and the rest of the house. Luckily, with the sun setting, the air was cooler now, so even when my dad gave me a strange look when he caught me shutting and locking every entry point to the house, he let it drop when I said the cool breeze was making the house cold. A few hours after that, around 9 p.m. I think, I sat in the living room watching a movie with my older brother. His name's Evan. Evan had just gotten up to go to the bathroom, leaving me alone in the room. The living room light was on, so I could see directly through the glass sliding door leading into the conservatory. I found my focus drifting from the TV screen to the glass doors. I shook myself and looked back at the TV, only to find my eyes drawn once again to the moon-drenched glass room. I stared back, and with a jolt, I saw something moving around in there. A black mass unfurled itself from its crouched position in the corner and moved towards the doors. I watched as it lifted a long, skinny hand and rapped its knuckles on the glass, as if it was asking me to let it in. My brother chose this moment to walk back in. He caught sight of my terrified face and followed my gaze to the conservatory door. I saw his eyes widen in horror. He leapt forward and drew the curtains over the glass sliding door, hiding this shadow man from view. Dad raised his eyebrows in confusion, but headed over to the door and almost ripped the curtains open. The man was gone, and Dad proceeded to berate us for shouting late at night and making a fuss over nothing. We tried to explain what had happened, but he remained skeptical and wouldn't believe our story. Not that I blame him, though. He sent us both to bed early. I begrudgingly headed up the stairs and got ready for bed, but as I lay there, trying my best to fall asleep, I heard a third and final knock on my bedroom window. I lay there stiff as a board, not daring to make a sound. I could hear the whistle of the cool night breeze and the sound of my own heavy breathing. Seconds melted into minutes, but no further sounds came. At some point, I must have drifted off to sleep, as the next thing I knew, I was being awakened by my siblings, telling me breakfast was ready. I never saw that shadow thing again, but he would not be the last entity that I had the pleasure to meet. Not at that house. Beware the shadows, because just about anything could be lurking there, waiting to pounce the moment you turn your back. What did I see? From Gidget. I was raised on a 200-acre farm in Virginia and have always been sensitive to my surroundings. I don't 100% believe in the paranormal aspect to cryptids, but I do believe in spirits. The farmhouse was built in 1775 and it was always active. It was beautiful at day and creepy, almost unwelcoming at night. I mean, I'm too creeped out to go outside at night on my 13 acres in Georgia, let alone my family farm in Virginia. I've always been outside exploring though, but can only achieve this during the daytime. I taught rock climbing at the age of 14 there, completed an 8-day outward bound course in North Carolina, and I try to get out as much as possible. I'm 35 now, and I'm like a squirrel that will pull over on road trips just to explore the new surroundings, especially if I see some interesting new sites, rock structures, or cemeteries. I'm constantly camping, swimming, hiking, kayaking, fishing, and exploring. I'm not afraid to go outside, but I'm always cautious and usually armed. Again, that's during the daytime. Well, on Sunday, December 16th of 2018, it was about 10:30 p.m. I was traveling down the road, bringing yet another carload from our old house to the new one. The day was in the 50s and a gibbous moon, which was 60% illumination, no rain from what I can remember. I was driving about 50 miles per hour, and there were no other cars on the road at the time, nor were there any streetlights out here. In my peripheral, to my left, I suddenly saw a 10 to 15 foot long dark brown object flying over the field, very fast. I didn't see wings, but what I saw did not have feet either. But as it was off the ground that far, it had to have been flying somehow. By the time I looked over, a second later it was gone. I even swerved due to turning around several times and slowing down. I've driven this road for years now, multiple times a week, and I still look when I drive by. To this day, I do not know what it was, but I've spoken to the owner of Expedition Bigfoot a few times, and he mentioned that last year, in this area, there were 4 reports of pterodactyl-like creatures being seen flying around here. I spoke to him in October of 2018. This was prior to my sighting, and I spoke to him again last month as he happened to be at a local park I was fishing at. Later the night of that sighting, the coyote screamed for almost 30 minutes straight, and in the past and to this day, I've only heard them call for 5 minutes at a time maximum. I'm not afraid of what's out there. I'm afraid of not being able to see it while it stalks me and possibly pounces on me. Sure, I might not know what I saw, but I know for a fact it wasn't some ordinary bird or leaf debris. I've driven this area in every type of weather condition. I've never been able to recreate that sighting in any way, not even close. I also have 2 other camping stories. One time we were camping at Three Forks Trail in North Georgia. I was awakened by the sound of something sniffing around our campsite. What's bizarre about this is that there were no tracks left, despite this thing sounding extremely heavy. Even more surprisingly, we stupidly left food out all over the place, but not a bit of it was touched. Another experience was from 2 years ago on a midnight hike involving tree knocks in South Tennessee, which is something supposedly common for Bigfoots to do. Believe it or not, I'm a hopeful skeptic, but one who wants to see something someday. Then again, I don't want to encounter something, if you catch my drift. I really don't want to see something I can't unsee or survive, but maybe one day I'll witness something from a safe distance that confirms the existence of the supernatural for me. Things often go bump in the night, and it's not always your upstairs neighbors getting a little too frisky. When the creatures of the night come crawling to your windowsill, you're gonna need more than just bug spray. Let's hope your mobile defense turrets and guard towers are fully loaded and maintained, because there's never such thing as too much firepower when dealing with cryptids. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story or a creepy experience of your own that you want to share with us, go to darknessprevails.org. If you want to support the show further, there are links in the description to my Patreon and to my merchandise store, where you can get some creepy cool shirts. Now then, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video, titled, "It Attached Itself to Me, 5 True Scary Stories." Rockefeller 6041 says, I got an attachment with a mind of its own too. Oh, I'm sorry, man. I hope that tumor gets better. Pips ZX says, me running downstairs. Where's my popcorn? Well, Pips, that doesn't explain why you're trying to open someone else's bedroom door. Unless for some reason that's where you keep your microwave. Luke Skywalker Indoor says, I have an Allosaurus skull, life-sized, in my room, so no demons would attack me. I don't know how that would protect you from demons, but as long as you believe, Luke, as long as you believe. Rachel Shipton says, could you do more mysterious monster videos? I myself am having trouble with animals like black bears and spiders lately. Ugh, good luck with that. I think I'd rather bare-knuckle box a bear than deal with any spider. Sir Savage the 21st says, bro, I just subbed, and you're already one of my favorite narrators. Well, I'm humbled. If you like my show, then you'll definitely like the No Sleep podcast, which I can't help but recommend to my peeps. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, because more scary stories are coming soon. Stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're great people. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.